So welcome all of you to this third day. I hope you enjoyed last 2 days. So this is the last day of the third day free webinar on TNSET English. And this is the structure of the set course offered at Professor Academy. And we looked at yesterday, the particularly weekly test 1. Today we look at worksheet. And let me explain the purpose and the method behind this worksheet. And there is also a history behind these worksheets. Worksheets, they are kind of literary workouts or kind of exercises that you have to do, in a sense, the aspirants of NET or SET. And this has a history. While I was doing my PhD at the University of Madras, I got the opportunity to take coaching classes. It's been sponsored by UGC, almost for 10 days, almost for sometimes back-to-back 2 weeks. And what I do at the end of the course, I have to give something. So I thought, let me give some worksheets for them so that they can work on their own, so that I can also introduce pieces of literature to them. And after the 10-day coaching, they should be self-reliant. And at that time, we didn't have enough money to give all my material to them. So I gave them only 10 worksheets. And each worksheet has 10 sections. So totally 10 worksheets, 100 sections. Each section begins with a piece of information followed by a question or a series of questions, sometimes some instructions. And the purpose of this worksheet is to introduce authors, works, concepts to the students, and they have to go and search them and read them on their own, because so that they can remember them well. So that is the purpose. And let's go to Worksheet 1. I have never worked out this in the sense, I have never gave a demonstration to my students, but generally they pick this up and previous students help them and they work on their own. But I thought, let me give an introduction today. So this is section number 1. What I do, I first give a piece of information so that, 10 worksheets, 100 sections, definitely they will get 100 points. After that, you have some questions or some activity or kind of an exercise they have to do on their own. So first piece of information, section 1. In rhetoric, what is rhetoric in literature? It's a kind of an art of elegant composition, like a poem, or you compose an essay where you have to write beautifully using figures of speech or kind of a language that appeals to others. So in rhetoric, we have a term called trope, which means turn or twist. In one NET exam, they asked this word itself. What is the meaning of the word trope? So I thought, why not introduce this word? And trope means twist or turn. Turn in the sense, the turn of the meaning of a word away from its literal meaning. Simply put, trope refers to figurative language or figures of speech. So all these come under trope. And the 4 master tropes in literature: metaphor, metonymy, synecdoche, and irony. So this is a piece of information I give to my students. So this is section 1. Maybe they have learned only one thing today, maybe trope. Okay, there is something called a trope. It is associated with figures of speech or figurative language. Fine. And at the end of this, I ask them a question. What does volta? I also give them a clue, a figure of, a feature of sonnets mean. So they have to find out the meaning of this word, which is something connected with the word trope. We will look at this today. But before that, my students should have some idea about metaphor, metonymy, synecdoche, and irony. So let me give a demonstration of how to work out these worksheets, particularly worksheet 1. I also have 9 worksheets, which my students get. Okay, so let's go for metaphor. What is a metaphor? Metaphor is a direct comparison or an explicit comparison between 2 dissimilar objects, right? So here is a beautiful poem by the confessional poet Metaphors. I am a riddle in 9 syllables. So there is a speaker in this poem. She is a pregnant woman, and she calls, that's why she says, I am a riddle, because she doesn't know, what's there, baby boy or baby girl, or because it's closed, the baby boy or the baby girl is yet to see the world. So in 9 syllables, in a sense, in 9 months. So after 9 months, the riddle will be solved. And in the meantime, this pregnant woman, how does she feel? She feels like an elephant. So if I say she feels like an elephant, that becomes a simile. So she doesn't say like or as, the markers. When you go for simile, you have markers like as or like. But when it comes to metaphors, it's direct. So she says, I'm an elephant. I'm a ponderous house, heavy house, a melon, a red fruit, ivory, timbers, loaf, a fat purse, cow. So suddenly there is a transformation in her body, and the pregnant woman feels there is change. There is some change in it. Sometimes she feels, oh my God, I'm carrying myself heavy, heavy me. So this is something different. And these are the metaphors. Beautiful poem. So if you want to introduce metaphor to your own students, maybe you can use this poem. Sylvia Plath's Metaphors. So you have all the metaphors. So what's the comparison? A comparison between a woman who is heavy because she's pregnant, carrying a child, and comparison between the pregnant woman, and a lot of metaphors: elephant, house, melon, red fruit, loaf, purse, cow. It goes on and on. And now she has to be very careful because sometimes she doesn't know whether she can pass through a door. Is the door wide enough to allow her? Maybe that kind of a question. And finally say there is no going back. She has boarded the train and she has to deliver a baby. So it's kind of a journey, 9-month journey. A 9-month, she has to be, she has to look after the child herself, and all the feelings that goes, the feeling of going to be mother. So everything is going on in her mind. This is metaphor. And I also like to draw your attention to metaphor in the sense, this is a traditional way of teaching metaphor. Whenever people teach metaphor, they say metaphor is a form of a noun. So here all the metaphors are in the form of a noun, elephant, house. But metaphor can also be in the form of verbs. For instance, if I say, it dawned on me that I should tell you certain things regarding metaphor. I have used the word, it dawned on me. You know the word dawn. I'm using it as a verb. It dawned on me in the sense it occurred to me. When I say it dawned on me, the word dawn, now the verb dawn refers to sunrise, the rising of the sun. Actually, it's a metaphor. Sometimes in everyday life, we also use metaphor very casually, but we are not aware of that. So when I use this expression, it dawned on me, when I use the word dawn, immediately you're aware of sun, the rising of the sun. So at the same time, an idea occurs in my mind automatically, like a sun. So I'm also using a metaphor, but in the form of a verb. So that's what I want to tell you. Metaphors can be in the form of verbs as well as in the form of nouns. But traditionally, people always teach you only nouns, as if she's a lion or she's a rose. It's very traditional, only in the form of nouns. Okay, so that's it. So next we go for metonymy. A metonymy in the sense you use one thing for something conventionally associated with it. For instance, crown. When we say the crown decided to punish the rebels. The crown here refers to anyone. Immediately you can associate crown with the crown decided to punish the rebels. What does
king?
Yes, king, or now it can be any royalty or anyone who is an authority, anyone who has power, authority. So the crown stands for power, generally power or monarchy or royalty, anything. So this is a conventional association. Now we associate the crown with power. Now say monarchy or power. So this is metonymy. So you use the symbol for the symbolized. Now this is the symbol. It symbolizes monarchy or king or power. So if you use this kind of, the symbol for the symbolized, or the attribute for what it attributes, what it conveys, then that is metonymy. And you also have examples like press. Now the printing press. Now when we say press, immediately you say press journalism, right? Because it's a printing press. It is known for, telling the truth, and you can immediately associate with, I hope anyone, Milton's track on the freedom of press in the first lecture. Yes, Aeropagetica. So that's by Milton. So this is how we remember things. I also told you in the first lecture how you should remember when you prepare for competitive exams. You should always collect points after points. Then you have to associate one thing with the other. So that's how you can remember all the things when it comes to exams. Okay. So the press, you can also remember Milton's Areopagitica. So the press refers to journalists. Similar way when you say pen, writers. So these are the conventional associations. We associate pen with writer. Sword, pen is mightier than the sword. So I would say when you introduce metonymy to our students, we should use this simple phrase. Pen is mightier than the sword. Simple. The pen is mightier than the sword. The pen refers to writers. The sword refers to soldiers. So that's a perfect example for metonymy. But let me give you another example, but a kind of a tricky reversed way of example from Robert Frost's poem, Out, Out. So in this poem, a boy accidentally cuts off his hand. Please put it on mute, Adarsh. A boy accidentally cuts off his hand and finally he dies. So it's based on a real event. So Robert Frost wants to register that event in his poem. So this is what he does. Please put it on mute. Okay. So Robert Frost, Out and Out. So it talks about the boy who has cut off his hand accidentally. So here is a poem. As he swung towards them, holding up the hand, half in appeal, but half as it to keep the life from spilling. The life here refers to blood, because this is the conventional association. We associate blood with life. So instead of saying blood, he says the life. Actually, it's the reverse way of using metonymy. So the life here refers to blood. So this is, we can also consider this as an example of metonymy. So simply put, metonymy, you use the symbolized for the symbol, right? Or kind of a conventional association, kind of an like a press or crown or pen. So these are the symbols and they convey something, right? So this is metonymy. Next, we go for its companion. Whenever we think of metonymy, we should also think of synecdoche. So what is synecdoche? As you all know, using substituting part for the whole or whole for the part. So here is a famous poem by Ezra Pound, In a Station of the Metro. And Ezra Pound is associated with which movement? Literary movement?
Imagism.
Yes, imagism. So when we think of imagism, Ezra Pound comes to your mind. And here is the perfect image. It's just, I would say, a comparison. This poem, this is a two-line poem. The poem itself is this line, only two lines. The apparition means ghost. The apparition of these faces in the crowd. You have a semicolon. Petals on a wet black bough. Full stop. That's all. The poem is over. So you have two things. I told you what is a metaphor. So actually, it's a metaphor, I would say. In a sense, generally, the poem is a metaphor. There's a comparison between two dissimilar things. One, the first part, it talks about people waiting on the platform of a metro station. And they are standing in a shade. So they look like ghosts. So you have the first one, the first part of the metaphor. The apparition of these faces in the crowd. So that talks about the people standing on the platform in shade. So they look like ghosts. And when it is crowd, no, it's very crowd, what you see only heads here and there. You don't see the whole person. Especially if you go to a metro station. Then you have a kind of a similar comparison here. Petals on a wet black bough. So you have a branch of a tree and it is black and it's wet maybe after rain. And you have a lot of petals on it. So that's all, the comparison is over. So it is a direct comparison. Instead of saying like, maybe the poet might have, Ezra Pound might have used a simile, like the apparition of these faces in the crowd, like petals on a wet black bough. Instead of using like or as, he simply used a perfect punctuation, a mark, semicolon, enough. So because of that semicolon, it becomes a metaphor. But where is synecdoche comes in here? Faces. So instead of saying people, faces is a part of a person, or face is a part of a person. So instead of saying people or no people out, so he says only faces. So part for the whole body. So this is synecdoche. So the apparition of these faces in the crowd, petals on a wet black bough. Simple. So very beautiful poem. So it's just an image. And you also know T.S. Eliot, 1922, his poem, The Wasteland, was dedicated to Ezra Pound. Now you can understand why there are a lot of images in T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. And you can see the influence of Ezra Pound, who edited that poem. So he dedicated, so T.S. Eliot dedicated that poem to Ezra Pound. Now let's look at another poem. The first part is an example of part for the whole. Because synecdoche, that's a definition, right? Simplest definition we are always given. Part for the whole or whole for the part. Next one, whole for the part. So Thomas Gray, which poet? I mean, he comes under which literary group?
Graveyard School, sir.
Yes, graveyard poet. We saw graveyard poets yesterday, which includes Edward Ng. And when you think of Edward Ng, what comes to your mind now? Related to Dr. Johnson?
Johnson's.
Yes, Dr. Johnson's Lives of the English Poets. Because in Lives of the English Poets, we have 52 lives. And one life, I mean, the biography of Edward Ng was not written by Dr. Johnson, but contributed by Ng's relative. So I hope you have been with me. This is the third day. So you're well aware of that. So now Thomas Gray, he says, instead of saying spring, he says the purple ear. So ear is the whole. But he is referring to only the part, only one season. The purple ear refers to spring. Instead of saying of the 4 seasons, he should refer to spring. Instead of saying spring, he says the purple ear. So that's a description, purple. So this is whole for the part. So ear for a particular season. So this is also synecdoche. So these are the examples for part for the whole and whole for the part. But people always ask sometimes, if you think deeper, sometimes there is a confusion between metonymy and synecdoche. Because in both, you substitute one thing for the other, don't you think? Because there you substitute the crown for monarchy. Here, for instance, face for people. Of course, it is part for the whole. But that is something different, but in the sense I would say, simply put, maybe let me confuse you deliberately. Let me give you 2 examples. I need a good hand to write on the board. Let's take head count. So in the phrase, if I say I need 2 good hands to complete this work, or if I say head count, that is something confusing in the sense both are kind of synecdoche or kind of a metonymy. We are also confused. Hand, it's a part of the body. Or simply put, what I'm trying to say, when it comes to synecdoche, you can't separate things. In the sense, face is a part of the body. Like when you say hand, I need a good hand, in a sense, hand is a part of the body, right? So you can't separate the thing we talk about and the thing that it represents. But when it comes to metonymy, you can separate things. For instance, a crown. Crown is just a piece of jewel. You can separate it from the head of the king or the queen. So that can be removable, right? Whereas when it comes to synecdoche, you can't remove. That's why we call it part for the whole. Sometimes people get confused between metonymy and synecdoche. This is a beautiful differentiation I read somewhere. With this, we go to the last part of section 1. So we have irony. So this is one of the major tropes. So when we think of tropes, turn of meaning. So we think of metaphor, metonymy, synecdoche, and irony. So when you say what is irony, you say something, but you mean the exact opposite. Sometimes I have certain students who talk a lot. Of course, I encourage them. I like talkative students. Sometimes you have to put them in that place because they don't give opportunities to other students. But I praise them in such a way they know that I'm not actually praising them, but asking them to shut up. I say, Gauri, you are the best student in the class, and if you can speak the whole hour, I don't need anyone. You yourself can fill the entire space of today. Then she will understand, oh my God, I'm talking a lot. Gauri was one of my MA students. So similar way here in Julius Caesar, we have Antony. Brutus is an honorable man, but he repeats the phrase again and again and again. And we get, the implied meaning. Okay, he is not saying honorable, but he means the opposite. Brutus is an inhonorable man. So that is the implied meaning. So he means the exact opposite. So that's why that's how irony functions. So which is essential to poetry. And we have Cleanth Brooks. Cleanth Brooks, now you can easily identify with which school of criticism? Cleanth Brooks. School of criticism. I hope yesterday we saw I.A. Richards, Cleanth Brooks. Anyone?
New criticism.
New criticism.
Yes. New criticism. And in new criticism, Cleanth Brooks is known for a lot of things, and especially this one, and also paradox. So here you have irony as a principle of structure. So in this essay, he uses a beautiful metaphor, and that I think can be an example for irony. So he says the tail of a kite. The purpose of the tail of a kite is ironic or paradoxical, self-contradiction. Why? I mean self-contradictory. Why? The purpose of a tail of a kite is to help the kite go up in the air. Now it has to help, it has to propel the kite into the air, into the sky. So that is the purpose, right? But once the kite reaches, somewhere in the top, in the air, the function of the kite differs. I mean, the tail of the kite differs. The tail now doesn't help it to go up, but it pulls it down. So there is a kind of a self-contradiction. In the sense, the purpose of the tail is to help the kite go up. At the same time, once it reaches the top, it pulls it down. So you see this contradiction. And Cleanth Brooks says, this is the principle of structure, in the sense, literary structure. You take any literary text, you can see this structure, this principle. Writers say something, or sometimes characters say something, but they also contradict themselves. Self-contradiction is an essence of any piece of literature. And when I think of this, I also think of another example given by, I read this example in Paulo Coelho's novel. Then I'm reminded of that example. So you have a typewriter, and the first question you look at, maybe if you work with your computer, laptop, or a cell phone, you look at the keyboard. What you see on the keyboard, jumbled letters, or kind of letters of the alphabet, the English alphabet, scrambled. Why don't they give us A to Z? Very easy, right? So instead of that, we have, I'm right now looking at my laptop, we have QWERTY, QWERTY, top. It's called QWERTY keyboard. So we have this question, why don't these guys give us A to Z so that we can, type fast? And I also had this question, but when I read Paulo Coelho's, I can't remember the novel, maybe Veronica Decides to Die. So in one of his novels, he tells a story or explains the mystery behind this QWERTY keyboard. Now, what is the notion we associate with the typewriter or this keyboard, this jumbled words? They help us type fast. So that is the notion we have. But it is actually ironical. It's actually the reversal. In the sense, when the QWERTY keyboard was invented, the purpose was to make us type slowly. Why? Because in those days, they typed fast, and the keys, behind the typewriter, they got jammed. So if you type fast, they get jammed. So, and they have to disentangle them every time. So they thought, why are they typing fast? Because letters A to Z, they are able to recognize, fast the letters. Okay, confuse them. They came up with kind of a QWERTY keyboard. There are a lot of types. So scrambled letters. Now check. Now you have to search for words, and we are forced to type slowly. So that was the purpose. Now, is entirely different. So the purpose now or the purpose then is different, or at least the notion is different. it's not to type fast, it is to make us type slowly. So this is kind of an irony. Okay, so what we did now, what we have done so far is that we finished off with trope, TROPE, which means a turn of meaning, and 4 major tropes. All right. And in section 1, at the end of the section 1, I asked you a question. What does volta, a feature of sonnets, mean? Generally, I do not explain. I ask my students to work this out. And how? Number 1, I also give my notes over 100 pages, 1000 pages. One, they can go to my poetry notes and they can read them, read the notes and find this out, or they can download books, literary forms and terms. Maybe they can use index and they search for this word, or internet, easy source. Okay, anyway, the word volta or even the word sonnet comes from Italian, right? So it comes from Italy. So the word means turn. So now you have the connection. The word trope and volta both means turn. There, trope means turn in meaning. Here, trope in sonnet means turn or change in the argument or mood of a sonnet. It happens, for instance, in the Italian or Petrarchan sonnet, you have octave, sestet, octave 8, sestet 6. It happens at the 9th line. There is a change in the argument. Then you have the English sonnet or Shakespearean sonnet. It happens at the 13th line, after the 3 quatrains, the beginning of the couplet. For instance, let's look at an example. So here's a poem, Shakespeare. Anyone? Sonnet number, very easy. Sonnet number
116.
Yes, sonnet number 116. And this poem is about true love. If you truly, if you love someone, with your good heart, you don't see their external beauty or external, whatever it is. You're not just carried away by their, outward features. You just, go deep into them, in the sense, you like something about their soul. Sometimes we don't bother about how they look, because if you're more bothered about how they look, after a period of time, people get old, and you cannot be obsessed with their beauty. And if you're more obsessed with your beauty, then the life is spoiled. So true minds, true lovers, they can face obstacles, but they overcome those obstacles, and finally they are always one in life. They always have the company of each other for entire life. So let me not, to the marriage of true minds, admit impediments. So there are no obstacles. There will be no obstacles for them. Even if they find obstacles, they will overcome it. And of course, love is kind of an ever-fixed mark, a metaphor, a beautiful metaphor. Like, it's like a scar on your body. It will never go away. It's there forever. And whatever argument you have, whatever fights you have, like tempest, you overcome all that. It's a kind of a smooth sailing. And finally, love is not time's fool. Time is kind of a personified here, because you are more obsessed with the beauty, and time will rob that beauty of your lover. So you are not bothered about rosy lips and cheeks. You are more bothered about the person's behavior, their character. The moment you see someone, your heart says, okay, this person I want in my life, because they care more for you, not just for your beauty or intellect. There is something more to that person. And you see 3 quatrains. At the end of the 3rd quatrain, you have a full stop, over. 13th line, there is a change in the argument, and that change is called volta in sonnets. If this be error, what? Oh my God. So suddenly a speaker is speaking to us, the speaker of this poem. If this be error, I mean, I have said something today. If you prove me wrong, I will never write. Or no one has ever loved. So there is no love at all. So this is, the voice of Shakespeare, or voice of the persona or the speaker of this poem. So this shift or turn in argument we call volta. Okay. I hope people are yet to prove Shakespeare wrong, because he still is with us. Okay. So that is section 1. So this is how my worksheets work. The purpose of the worksheet is make my students work. Of course, it lessens my burden, but the purpose is they are going to take the test. So they should read firsthand. not through me. Of course, I also teach, I provide them with notes, everything, but ultimately they have to read. So next we go to section 2, but I also give them a piece of information. In every section, I give them a piece of information. For instance, the subtitle of G.M. Hopkins' poem, The Wind Hover, is To Christ Our Lord. So this is a piece of information. Who knows, this might be a question. So this is how I do. For instance, I told you 10 worksheets, so totally 100 sections. So definitely they will get 100 points. Then you have series of questions, sometimes one. So here I ask them to study Langlott's Piers Plowman, Milton's Ode on the Morning of Christ's Nativity, John Bunyan's The Pilgrim's Progress, William Blake's A Poison Tree, Dryden's The Hind and the Panther, Dickens' A Christmas Carol, T.S. Eliot's Journey of the Magi. But I also make sure there is a common thread, because in section 1, something with a turn. Trope means turn, Volta means turn. Similarly here, something with Christianity. And you can also bring in Milton's Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained here. So if you are aware of that, and look at all the poems or pieces of literature here, something to do with Christian belief and faith. And now I can't explain all this here. Now the purpose is, make my students or help them read literature on their own. Now at least they should check. I understand. Please grumble. Please do not grumble. Put it on mute, please. Okay. Okay. So this is what we do. We have to go now as a student. Okay, check out Langland. Piers Plowman, at least read the outline of Piers Plowman. Maybe check out Milton, Bunyan, or Blake. So this is your job. But anyway, since I'm here, maybe I will give you some more points on section 2. We have Gerard Manley Hopkins, a poet who wanted to be a priest. So he had this inner trouble, to be or not to be. I mean, in the sense, to be a priest or to be a poet. And this question troubled him a lot, and he wrote a lot of poems. Then he burned them. Some of them he gave it to Robert Bridges, and he asked Robert Bridges, do not publish them, burn them, destroy them. But Robert Bridges didn't do that. He published, his poems, Gerard Manley Hopkins' poems, posthumously in 1918. Poems of Gerard Manley Hopkins. Okay, so if Robert Bridges had followed his instructions faithfully, we would not have got this collection. Anyway, this itself might be a question. Who helped Gerard Manley Hopkins after his death to publish his poems posthumously? Robert Bridges. Like now you can connect this with Milton, because in 1652 Milton became completely blind, and Andrew Marvell, the metaphysical poet Andrew Marvell, helped him escape the punishment. So maybe you can draw parallels now. Okay, Milton, then you have Andrew Marvell. Okay, then next list, G.M. Hopkins, Robert Bridges. Similar way, you can also go for another connection. For instance, yesterday we looked at Mikhail Bakhtin under Russian formalism. So Mikhail Bakhtin, who published or translated and published his works? Editor. Anyone?
Hallquist.
Beautiful. Yes, Hallquist. So that may be another list. So now you are building your own notes. So this is how you make notes. So whenever you prepare for an exam, you make your own notes. So you come up with your own logic. So now you can leave a page to this poets and who help them, or writers who are helped by others. So you have Mikhail Bakhtin, then you have Hallquist, editor who, because if he didn't publish, if he hadn't published Mikhail Bakhtin, we would not be aware of Mikhail Bakhtin and his contribution to literature. So you have Mikhail Bakhtin, Hallquist. Similar way, you have Kafka. Francis Kafka had the same problem, and almost along with Hopkins. Anyone remembers his literary?
Max Beerbohm. I remember.
Yes, Max Brod. Beautiful. Max Brod, B-R-O-D. So now we have a solid list, right? So we have Milton, Andrew Marvell, Robert Bridges, Hopkins. Then you have Mikhail Bakhtin, Hallquist. Then you have Francis Kafka. Then you have Max Brod. Or simply put, you can title this page Literary Executors. So they are called executors, officially, or sometimes they take up that role. Okay. So with this, we move on to Hopkins. So when you think of Hopkins, he also used some technical terms. Anyone?
Curtail sonnet.
Oh, yes,
10 and
that
a
is
half
there.
lines.
Not that one, but I'm
Oh,
going for it.
inscape,
Split
escape,
rhyme, split rhyme.
Yes,
Stress.
inscape and instress. When you
inscape.
think of yes, that's also curtail sonnet, but I'm not talking about curtail sonnet today. But anyway, how many lines are there in curtail sonnet?
10 and a half.
10 and a half lines. So 10 plus a tail. So 10 and a half lines. Curtail, C-U-R-T-A-L, curtail sonnet. Curtail means the cutoff. So 14 lines you cut off, you reduce it to 10 and a half lines. So that sonnet was introduced by Gerald Manley Hopkins, technically, but he is known for this concept called inscape. When you say scape, like mindscape, landscape, it refers to something, right? So inscape refers to inner beauty or essence or individuality of a living thing in nature. So remember this, in refers to inner beauty or inscape. So hereafter you should not forget this concept, inscape, right? The inner beauty of a living thing in nature, including human. Next, instress refers to the kind of interpreter or the person, kind of an observer, how someone realizes that individuality of the thing or a person. Sometimes we realize, I would say spot. We say that person is known for spotting talent. I know certain professors, they are known for spotting talent and also abuse or misuse them. So you spot, you realize, oh my God. So you have friends, you have people around you. Sometimes we don't realize their worth, but when we realize that their essence, kind of a love, individuality, that association, that perception, that realization is called instress. And when it comes to poetry, how a poet is going to represent that inscape, through instress. So I also told you in the first class, day one, whenever you learn a concept, you should have examples. If you do not have examples, you will easily forget. So let's look at an example. Of course, a poem, The Wind Hover, to Christ our Lord. So it talks about, the wind hover talks about an eagle, a falcon here. So the falcon has an essence, inscape. What is its inscape? Its ability to fly in the air and stay afloat in midair. And effortlessly, it can stay there in midair. How can it do that? It's very effortless. It just stay there on its own. And it is, as a king, it is there. And you also realize, maybe the speaker of the poem realizes the individuality of this falcon. So this individuality of the falcon is inscape. And your realization, or the speaker of the poem realizes that. And he wants to, admire that falcon, and also representation of God. So it's like James Hopkins realizes God. It's a kind of a manifestation of God. And he follows, and he wants to be a priest. Okay. So it's kind of an epiphanic moment. Epiphany, E-P-I-P-H-A-N-Y. And when it comes to literature, who uses the term epiphany?
James Joyce.
James Joyce. So James Joyce uses this term epiphany, moment of realization. It happens in many of his works, and especially which work in which a boy who wants to be a priest and finally decides to be an artist, which came before Ulysses.
Portrait of an artist.
Portrait of the
yes.
artist.
The portrait of the artist as an young man. So now what I'm saying, you can compare James Hopkins with that boy. What's his name? The hero of
Stephen Dedalus.
Yes, Stephen Dedalus. So hereafter, whenever you think of James Hopkins, you can think of Stephen Dedalus, the character in James Joyce's novel, Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. Because same thing, because Stephen Dedalus has the same problem. He wants to be a priest. At the same time, he wants to be a poet. But same problem with James Hopkins. He wants to be a Jesuit priest, but he says, okay, writing poetry gives pleasure to me. Is it a sin? Should I be a writer, or should I perceive God? So he is caught between that. It's a kind of a to be or not to be question. So now the speaker of this poem also has the same confusion. Maybe, and here is a moment of realization, epiphanic moment. Because in that novel, in a Portrait of the Artist as a young man, Stephen Dedalus realizes that when he sees a girl playing with waves, and he wants to capture that moment in his writing. And he realizes, oh God, I want to be a writer. How can I capture this beautiful scene? Somewhere, I have to capture it somewhere. And only as an artist, I can capture that. So that is kind of an eureka moment, right? So kind of an eureka, oh my God, I got the answer. I got the solution. So same way here, that realization or association is called instress. And that individuality of someone or something in nature, that is, inscape. So you can see the poem. I caught this morning's minion, kingdom of daylight's dauphin, dapple, dawn, drawn, falcon, in his riding of the rolling level, underneath him steady air. So he sees a falcon that is like a king ruling his kingdom, that is the sky, and there is no agitation. Very beautifully he's floating there, and it is the inscape of the falcon. And the writer or the speaker here or the poet is able to capture that, but the language is so different here. And you can also see the beautiful alliteration, kingdom of daylight, dauphin, dapple, dawn, drawn. Okay, so with this I move to here's another concept, sprung rhythm. Whenever you think of Jim Hopkins, you think of sprung rhythm. So there is the rhythm, when you every poem has. So what is sprung rhythm? Sprung rhythm is inspired from nursery rhymes. See, this is how people get inspired. So why nursery rhymes? Because in nursery rhymes we go for accentual meter. Accentual means the stressed syllables. Accent, you stress accent. So like ding dong bell. So each and every syllable is stressed. Ding dong bell, right? Or twinkle twinkle little star. So there is this is called this is peculiar to nursery rhymes. So that's why this rhythm has something to do with memory. So why do we remember all these things? Because this rhythm helps us to remember those lines, that image. So ding dong bell. And Hopkins thought, why not use it in poetry? And this is called sprung rhythm. Let me explain. So in sprung rhythm, every foot, foot refers to a combination of two syllables. Every this combination begins with a stressed syllable. It can be a single syllable, monosyllable, or trochee, a stressed syllable followed by unstressed syllable. Then you have tactile, stressed syllable, unstressed, unstressed, or sometimes it's called peon. So you have four. The first one is stressed. So if you are interested in learning about meter, so I have also released a video on prosody. You can go to Professor Academy's YouTube channel and playlist. You will find UGC net. There you will find 1 hour lecture on meter. If you are interested in learning about meter, rhythm, so you can check out that lecture. Okay, I carry on. So this is how it goes. So what happens when it comes to sprung rhythm? You can have any number of unstressed syllables, no problem at all. But what happens? We jump from one stressed syllable to unstressed syllable, another stressed syllable. Another, from there you jump to another stressed. So we are springing, we are jumping from one strong beat to another. So this is that's why we call this rhythm sprung rhythm. So we are springing, we are jumping from one accent to another, sorry, one accented syllable to another accented syllable or stressed syllable. So ding, then you go to dong, then to bell. Okay, so this is sprung rhythm. Hope you like it. Next, we have to talk something about section 2. In section 2, I introduced Hopkins. I also asked you to look into or study a list of works associated with Christianity. So maybe it's high time you read the entire collection, or at least the detailed summary of John Bunyan's The Pilgrim's Progress. Subtitle, From This World to That Which Is to Come. It's an allegory, a lot of characters, a kind of a symbol, they symbolize something. And the main character, Christian, who has committed a lot of sins, and he carries his sin as a burden behind his back. Then, so he goes on a journey, kind of a pilgrimage, from his city, the city of destruction full of sins, to the celestial city. We know the outline, a proper outline. And you know the story, it's a kind of a dream poem. The writer, John Bunyan, or the speaker or the narrator falls asleep. Then he has a dream. In that dream, he meets a person called a Christian who undergoes an arduous pilgrimage. And there might be a question. So this is how Christian, these are the points. In the sense, first he starts a journey from the city of destruction, I mean this world. Then the slough of despond, it's a bog. Then the interpreter's house, the house beautiful, the valley of humiliation. Then the valley of the shadow of death. The title is often used. Then you have Vanity Fair. Okay, who used this as a name for his novel? Vanity Fair.
William
Yes,
Thackeray.
Thackeray. So we have William Thackeray. Then you have Doubting Castle. Then the Delectable Mountains. Then 10th, the country of Beulah. Then 11, the celestial city on Mount Zion. Sometimes they will simply give you 3 or 4. They will ask you to arrange it chronologically, and I mean right order. This kind of a question comes. The same question. Similarly, you also get question like this from T.S. Eliot's Wasteland. There are 5 sections. Sometimes they give, arrange it differently. They go for, they ask you to arrange it correctly. So whenever you have 4 or 5 sections in a piece of work, you remember that order, or there will be a problem. Okay, so you should remember this order, and you should also know what happens in each and every section. So this class is not to explain each and every section. Maybe I can explain one section for you. The interpreter's house. So after a Christian, comes out of the bog, he goes to the interpreter's house, where the interpreter, the interpreter of the Bible or the scripture, he gives a series of lessons on religious life to Christian, and he takes him from room to room in that house. The interpreter's house refers to the church, and the interpreter is a priest, and he talks about the Bible, the scripture, and the room. So in the first room, the room is very dusty. The room, it's an allegory. It refers to our heart, which is dusty. Then there are 2 people who are trying to clean that room, because in this life we follow only law, the government's law, or there are certain laws here, but we have to follow God's law. I mean the scripture, God's words, but we go with the earthly law. So the first character comes as law, sweeps the dust, but it doesn't go away. The sin doesn't go away. It settles down again. Then gospel comes. She cleans it by sprinkling water. So dust settles down. Okay. So it's an allegorical poem. It symbolically says, all the time you can't go by the laws made in the earth. You have to go by God's law. Okay. The scriptures, what's said in the scripture. In the next room, we see 2 children, or Christian is shown 2 children, patience and passion. Both are promised treasures after a year, but passion says, no, I want this now. Like a child, he says, no, I want my treasures now. So God sends someone, and his treasures are given to passion. Now passion receives the treasures, but the treasures turn them into rags immediately, nothing. But patience, waits, believes in God's word. Ultimately, patience is rewarded, or will be rewarded with everything. So this is between, the faithful followers and those who want to get everything here and now. Sometimes people ask, no, why is God, checking me? I want my rewards here. No, it doesn't happen like that. Sometimes we have to go through certain trials and tribulations in life. Then finally we are rewarded, like patience is rewarded here. So patience or passion here is kind of an allegorical one. Next to room, there is a fire. So it's like in our heart. So there is a spiritual fire in our heart. But what happens? We are tempted by a devil. So here a devil tries to put out that fire by throwing water on it. But we also know we are guided by God. So there is a person behind the wall who is feeding the fire with oil. So we have to firmly believe in God, so that God will, help us, overcome the temptation by devil or Satan here. So next room, so there is a dark room. There is a man of despair. In this man of despair, Christian sees himself. Oh my God, we are trapped inside ourselves, our sins. So like a Christian is carrying a bundle of sins on his back, This man, a man of despair, is caught, in his own cage. He has built a cage for himself with his sins. He can't come out of it. So this serves as a warning to Christian. And finally, he is taken to a bedroom where someone is sleeping. In his sleep, there is a dream. And in that dream, it's a kind of a final judgment. God divides the blessed and the damned. And the person realizes that he is not chosen. So he is damned. So he's a damned one. So he can't go to paradise. So this is also serves as a warning to Christian. So this dream, as a dreamer, has found himself among the damned. So Christian doesn't want to be among the damned. So he wants to be among the blessed. So he continues his journey, and the interpreter says, "Go on with these lessons. Go on and find out true. Find out your true purpose and reach God." Okay. So he continues the journey. On the way, what happens? So he sees the cross. And for the first time, he realizes, oh my God, I understand what God's want me to do in this life. And the moment he realizes that, his burdens lift off, they come out of his shoulder. And now he's a free man. But the journey is not yet over. And he is given a sealed scroll. This scroll is important because without this scroll, he will not be he will not be given admittance into celestial gate. So it's a kind of a password or a kind of code. So he has to carry this scroll. But what happens? He moves on. On the way, he comes across two people, formality and hypocrisy. They are taking a shortcut to celestial city. And they say, hey, you are going to this narrow path. It will take a lot of time. Come with us. So you will reach the celestial city. It's like asking the net or set aspirants, hey, come on. In that book, they are giving 10,000 points. So when I thought of that, I thought of, the students who are preparing for set and net. They always think, instead of going for, read text in detail. They always go for sometimes summaries, sometimes only points. And people also cheat you when they say, in our book, we are giving 10,000 points. What are you going to with that 10,000 points? In this very slide, I can give 4 or 5 points. If the entire 75 slides, I can give you more than 200 points. But will you remember everything? That's the point. So there is no shortcut to net or set. If you want to clear these competitive exams, sometimes you have to go through. There are trials like Christian. Read the summaries, backgrounds, everything. It takes time. At least you have to invent 3 months. Okay. So next, what happens? He sleeps on the way and he loses the scroll, and then he continues. He comes across another two people. Timorous means one who is afraid. Then mistress, who doesn't believe in others. They are coming in the running in the opposite direction after seeing a pair of lions. Okay, the pair of lions comes in the next section. The house beautiful. But anyway, our Christian, after learning his lessons from the interpreter, he walks ahead, and of course, he realizes that he is missing the scroll. He goes back and gets it, and he goes to the next stage. House beautiful. Okay, so this is what I can do now in the short time. So your job, maybe you can go on read the entire summary, detailed summary of Pilgrim's Progress. Okay, so let's go to next one. Maybe we can also look at Blake's poem. This poem comes in Songs of Experience. Innocence is lost. Songs of Innocence, Songs of Experience, a poison tree. So look, I was angry with my friend. I told my wrath did end. That means anger. I was angry with my foe, enemy. I told it not, my wrath did grow. Right? So it's like your anger. So if you're angry with someone, tell your friend that you are angry with him or her. Why? Or if you try to harbor enmity, then you're also doomed, and everything is doomed for you. And I watered it in fears, night and morning with my tears, and I sunned it with my smiles and with soft, deceitful wiles. And it grew both day and night, till it bore an apple bright, and my foe beheld it shine, and he knew it was mine. And into my garden stole, and when the night had veiled the pole, in the morning glad I see my foe outstretched beneath the tree. So it's a trap. So he attracted or kind of attempted his enemy to barge into his garden, and he has a poison tree, which has an apple. So it also harks back to Paradise Lost, the apple, the forbidden apple, or the forbidden fruit, tree of knowledge. So how we lost our innocence and full of venom, poison in us. So your enemy is also killed, but you will also feel sad for that. So this is Blake. So all these poems have one commonality, something called Christian belief, that you don't hurt your neighbors. Even if they hurt you, you love them always. So okay, with this we go to, oh my God, section 2, you have Dickens again. Okay, again Christian theme. Christmas Carol. This one, you have a miser, Scrooge, Ebenezer Scrooge, and he sees a ghost before Christmas, his partner, Marley. Now he comes as a ghost, and Scrooge is a miser, very, very tight fellow. He doesn't spend a lot. At the end of this work, there's a change of heart, and he is no longer a miser. He becomes generous. So this is also a Christian theme, and Dickens' most famous work, and it's often read every year by Christians before Christmas, A Christmas Carol. But let me ask you a question. Let me also tell you something. Yesterday we looked at Northrop Frye, and we associated him with the archetypal criticism. And what is an archetype? Archetype refers to themes or person or symbols that come again and again in literature. And this is one of the themes that come again and again in literature. We have a miser who has a change of heart. We can find this theme in literature. So this is one example for it. Scrooge is a famous example for that archetype. The theme that comes again and again in literature. This theme is very famous. And you can also find this theme in one of George Eliot's novel, where people think a weaver. He is a weaver. He's considered a miser. But this weaver stumbles upon a child and he names her Epi. Then there is a change of heart. He is no longer a miser. Which novel?
Silas Marner.
Yes, Silas Marner. Right? Now you can connect Dickens' A Christmas Carol with George Eliot's Silas Marner. And both are Victorian novelists, Dickens and you have George Eliot. And Dickens used a pen name called the Boss, B-O-Z. Yesterday we saw that. And you have George Eliot, Mary Ann Evans. So maybe one connection, and this will do. And since you know Scrooge and you have Silas Marner, both are misers initially, and this is kind of an archetype. You can connect it with, Northrop Frye, archetypal criticism. Okay. So with this, we move on to section 3. So section 3, what I do, I give you a piece of information in the beginning. I'm introducing a Japanese-born British novelist and Nobel laureate, Kazuo Ishiguro, and he won the Booker Prize for The Remains of the Day, which is considered his masterpiece, The Remains of the Day. Then you have is another famous novel, kind of science fiction, but written in the form of a realist novel, Never Let Me Go. And I also give you a clue. Both were made into films. What I'm trying to do here, I'm encouraging you to at least watch the movie. If you can't read the entire novel or the summary of the novel, why don't you watch the movies, both the movies, so that it will stay in your mind. That's also art, right? Movies. So that's why I made that point. Both were made into films. So you can watch the films, I mean, The Remains of the Day and Never Let Me Go. What happens after that? You'll never forget Kazuo Ishiguro. He becomes part of you and you'll remember both the stories. And I also asked a question. Who wrote Norwegian Wood and Kafka on the Shore? Anyone? Famous novels? Norwegian Wood and Kafka on the Shore. So this is a question. So this is how, yes. So this is how, yes, Murakami. Yes, Haruki Murakami. Many of you are getting it right. Classic. In our modern literature, contemporary literature, these novels are considered classics. So Haruki Murakami. So I have introduced you a Japanese writer. So Norwegian Wood. Some of you are already aware of him. Haruki Murakami. So you have Kafka on the Shore, another famous novel. And already we are aware of Kafka's literary executor, Max Brod. And yesterday we looked at Ovid's Metamorphosis and Kafka's Metamorphosis. Now you can, whenever you think of Kafka, you can think of Ovid's Metamorphosis, his work Metamorphosis, then you can think of Haruki Murakami's Kafka on the Shore. Okay, so the purpose is simple. At least you should check out these novels and the plot, get to know the plot of both the novels. So yesterday, one of you asked a question, sir, how can we know, the writers around the world? One simple thing is that you have to check literary prizes, Booker, Nobel, or women's prize for fiction. So every year, that's how you can update yourself. So that's how you can acquaint yourself with contemporary writers, right? So that's one way. And once you start looking for one writer, definitely you'll stumble upon another writer. So that's how you can equip yourself with literature, contemporary literature across the world. Okay, so with this I move to section 4, and that's for you to solve, because I don't think I can work out everything within 2 hours. Sometimes my students say they take more than a week, sometimes 2 weeks to work out a single worksheet. And I heard my previous students are yet to finish all my 10 worksheets, but I'm happy that they are still working on that, because in a way it keeps them occupied, and at least they are able to work them on their own. I believe this is my type of coaching. I can't feed you everything, but I can make you self-reliant by helping you like this, because this is my methodology. This is one methodology. Yesterday you saw my another methodology, that is test. Through test and through 4 options, I help you read literature, and through worksheet I help you with notes, my lectures. So all, it's kind of interconnected. Okay, so here section 4. So you have this American writer James Fenimore Cooper and his famous tales, his series of novels, Leatherstocking Tales. So it is a series of novels, and each of this novel has this hero, Natty Bumbo. So this is a piece of information. You may simply get a question: who wrote Leatherstocking Tales? You can answer James Fenimore Cooper. And in this collection, in this series of novels, the most famous one is The Lost of the Mohicans, 1826. Okay, enough. Maybe now it's time you go to internet or check out The Lost of the Mohicans. At least read the plot. Detailed summary or summary. Enough. Next, I ask you to read Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye, Song of Solomon, and Beloved. Some of you might have already read at least 1 or 2 of these prescribed novels, often prescribed The Bluest Eye and Beloved. In The Bluest Eye, it talks about how the inferiority complex or the racial stereotyping, how blue eye or the bluest eye are associated with white people, beauty, other thing. Whereas here is a girl, Piccola, she feels inferior because her skin is black and she doesn't have blue eyes. So for her, blue eyes means the white people, beauty. But anyway, she has to come out of that complex in that novel. Then Toni Morrison's famous work, Beloved, a kind of a magic realist work. It is based on a real life incident. Margaret Garner, a slave, she escaped from a plantation and she had children. And when slave owners came to fetch them or capture them, she killed her children or child. Why? Because it was, she thought, I had gone through a lot of things. She was raped and she had to go through a lot of things in the plantation run by the whites. So she thought, my children shouldn't go through that. Instead, they can die. So she killed her own child. So this is history. And this history, inspired Toni Morrison to come out with a novel called Beloved. Same plot, almost same. And the dedication, 6 million and more, refers to people who died. Black people who were killed or who died during the slave trade. So that is the dedication. And I need not talk about the entire novel, but this is the perfect opening I have ever read. Beloved. Look at, this is just less than 1 paragraph, but Toni Morrison has done a beautiful job here. first sentence, 1 to 4 was spiteful. It refers to the address, door number 1 to 4. 3 is missing. You can note that because Seth, the protagonist, she has 4 children and she killed 1, right? So 3 is missing, eldest daughter. And when she killed the daughter and she buried the daughter, she didn't have enough money to engrave the tombstone. She didn't have enough money to pay someone to engrave a lot of things on the tombstone. She had to sleep with someone, and that person helped to write only one word on the tombstone, beloved. That's all. And you have 1, 2 son, and the 4th one, I think Denver. So maybe, so you have Seth. So you can, Seth is inspired from Margaret Garner. Then the children, Denver, the daughter who is with Seth, then her grandmother, baby Sooks. Then you have 2 sons, Howard and Bugler. But they ran away. Why? Because this home, 1 to 4, was spiteful, full of a baby's venom. The baby refers to the dead child, their sibling, dead sibling, beloved. Okay. So they ran away. How? Howard had ran away by the time they were 13 years old. As soon as merely looking in a mirror shattered it. So that is the signal for burglar. So why? Burglar, the moment he saw, he looked in a mirror and it shattered. And he thought, my God, I should run away. As soon as 2 tiny handprints appeared in the cake, that was it for Howard. And Howard ran away. So now the story is the central characters. We have Seth and Denver. It's between mother and daughter and the entire community. The entire community is against these 2 because she killed her own child. So the entire story is about how these people get connected with their own community, Black community. And in between, you have some magic realism where the dead child, beloved, comes home as a matured woman in terms of body, but she behaves like a child. And Seth thinks, oh my God, my dead child is back. Then she feeds her everything, but Seth, she grows weak and she's about almost on the verge of dying. And Denver goes out, seeks the help of the community, and the Black community comes and they drive away, the dead, I mean the beloved. And the last scene, she just disappears, vanishes in the thin air. So that's the ending of this novel. So now Seth, Denver, there's a kind of a reconciliation with the community and with herself. And Paul D, one of the men in the plantation she was where she was a slave. And now you can understand irony used by Toni Morrison. The name of the plantation is Sweet Home. That is irony. It was not sweet to Seth or Black people. So this is irony beautifully used by Toni Morrison. Sweet Home. She named that plantation Sweet Home. Okay. So this is 1. So let's go to section number 5. The subtitle of Wordsworth's autobiographical poem, The Prelude, is Growth of a Poet's Mind. Enough. And yesterday, most of you got it right, 1850. It was published in 1850. And the year is important because the year Wordsworth died, 1850. And it is its subtitle, Growth of a Poet's Mind, and the title is given by his wife, Mary Hutchinson. The Prelude. So enough. Now I ask you a series of questions. Vanity Fair, Tess of the Tubables, Frankenstein, Pamela, The Spanish Tragedy, She Stoops to Conquer, Pride and Prejudice. Now you have to find the subtitles of all these works. And probably I also kind of indirect request, you should know at least the summary of all these works, major works. So let's look at The Prelude, Growth of a Poet's Mind, 1850. It's an autobiographical poem. And in this poem, of course, there are a lot of things, but one episode is often talked about, and that episode is Wordsworth's The Boat Stealing episode. During his childhood, Wordsworth is known for stealing a lot of things. He stole, eggs from bird's nest, a raven's nest. Then he also stole rabbits from someone's snare. And this episode, had an impact on his life, the boat stealing episode. So one summer evening led by her, nature. So he is blaming nature. So nature tempted Wordsworth to steal a boat. I found a little boat tied to a willow tree. So he took that boat and he went for a ride. So an act of stealth. And he wants to see a mountain there. So it's nighttime. So there is there's moon, and he can see that moon in the water. I fixed my view upon the summit of a craggy ridge. So he is going to that ridge with this boat. But what happens? Of course, he describes his boat. My boat went heaving through the water like a swan. He enjoys that. So it's a kind of a comparison, a simile. The boat is like a swan. But once he goes towards the mountain, a huge peak, but it terrifies him. It reminds him of his guilt, as his sin. Mr. Wordsworth, you have stolen a boat. And what are you doing? Here, go back. So you can't steal. So it's a kind of a pathetic fallacy coined by Ruskin. So the nature reminds him of his sin and his act of stealth. Then he goes back, and there in the mooring place, I left my bark. So this incident somehow troubled Wordsworth. It made him, a kind of a moody person in grave and serious mood. Over my thoughts there hung a darkness, and he calls this solitude or blank desertion. Mind is empty now. So of course, the definition given to poetry by him in his preface, 1800, right? So what is poetry for him? Most famous definition by Wordsworth.
Poetry is a spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings and emotions that are recollected from tranquility.
Oh my God. Okay, thank you. Okay, so it is recollected in tranquility, of course, a spontaneous overflow. So what happens? You go through certain emotions in your life. They get stored in your unconscious mind or in your mind. After a period of time, you chew on it, and spontaneously it comes out in the form of poem. So that's his definition for poetry. And of course, he lived in Lake District, and this is the place he stole that boat, Ullswater Lake. And this made an impact on his life. Maybe when he wrote this poem, of course, it is a spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings recollected in tranquility. This episode itself. So, but huge and mighty forms that don't live like men, like living men, move slowly through the mind by day, were a trouble to my dreams. So what happens? It happens, if you are a poet, I would say, if he wants to be a writer, so if you are a writer, you might have gone through this feeling. If you come across a scene, if you want a poem, if you want to write a poem or a short story, it troubles you. You can't sleep at night. It happens to us. Even a short story, or even a good research paper, or your own thesis or dissertation, it troubles you. It makes an impact on you. Same thing happened to him, and he wrote this poem. Okay, then these are the subtitles. We have William Thackeray, Vanity Fair. Of course, the title is taken from Pilgrim's Progress. Subtitle: A Novel Without a Hero. Hardy, Tess of the Gibberells, a pure woman faithfully presented. Then you have, hello, Papa. So you have Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, Modern Prometheus. Then you have Samuel Richardson's Pamela, Virtue Rewarded. Thomas Kidd's The Spanish Tragedy, Hieronymo is Mad Again. Oliver Goldsmith, She Stoops to Conquer, Mistakes of a Night. One question: who is that famous character who is known for his humor in She Stoops to Conquer?
Tony Lumpkin.
Yes, Tony Lumpkin. Beautiful. Then you have Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, First Impressions. Because first impression, right? Because pride refers to which character? So you have to, yes, Darcy, and prejudice, Elizabeth Bennet. So pride and prejudice. And we can also connect Pamela with Milton, Pamela, Virtue Rewarded. Remember, can someone tell me the name of Milton's Masque, Masque, where a girl who is known for his virtue is rewarded?
Comus.
Yes, Comus, Comus. So now you can connect Milton's Comus with the Pamela. they are rewarded for their virtue. Okay, let's go to section 6. In section 6, we have the South African writer James Coetzee's work, The Master of Petersburg, beautiful novel, whose hero is none but Dostoevsky, the Russian writer Dostoevsky as its protagonist. So this is a piece of information to you. It's also a biographical novel. There is a type of novel called a biographical novel, where writers take the biography of a historical person like Dostoevsky, and they mix some fiction and they write a novel with that. One such novel is James Coetzee's The Master of Petersburg, whose hero or the protagonist Dostoevsky, the Russian writer. And there's also a connection between James Coetzee and Dostoevsky, because James Coetzee lost his son. Dostoevsky also lost his son. And this novel also talks about that. Okay, so that is some connection between James Coetzee and Dostoevsky. And this is one way of introducing James Coetzee to my students, a South African writer. And I also asked them to read his famous works like Disgrace. I would consider his masterpiece, Disgrace. Disgrace, the novel. Then Life and Times of Michael K. There are a lot of other novels. I might have read, I think, more than 8 or 9 novels written by James Coetzee, because my PhD dissertation is on James Coetzee, at least one chapter. Then I asked a question. One of his novels features a fictional novelist called Daniel Defoe. Which novel? So that's a question.
4.
Yes?
4.
Yes, 4. Because the clue is already there. 4. And I'm also introducing some biographical novels like J. Parini, The Lost Station. Anyone? Lost Station, who is the hero? Another Russian.
Tolstoy.
Yes, Leo Tolstoy. Now you can connect G.M. Coetzee's The Master of Petersburg, Dostoevsky, with J.M. Parini's The Lost Station, Leo Tolstoy. Now then you have Naomi Wood's Mrs. Hemingway, because Hemingway married a lot of times in his life, and this is from her perspective. Yes, the answer, before that, you also, we have another curious fact, that James Coetzee was the first person to win Booker Prize twice. First for Life and Times of Michael K. You can also connect Michael K. with Kafka, because when you read Kafka, it's a kind of nightmarish world, most of his stories setting, and most of his character have K, something like that. The name is not full. So this novel is a tribute to Kafka, by the way, Life and Times of Michael K. Okay, so then you have James Coetzee's famous work, The Disgrace, winner of Booker Prize. Then Peter Carey also won Booker Prize twice, one for Oscar and Lucinda, one for True History of the Kelly Gang. The title is so interesting. Why the adjective true? So what happened in that history? So Kelly Gang, it was misrepresented. So they have a lot of histories, or maybe historians. So true history. So maybe it claims the other side. It's a kind of, this novel is offering the other side of the Kelly Gang. Then we have Hilary Mantel, British writer. She also won Booker Prize twice, one for Wolf Hall in 2009 and Bring Up the Bodies for in 2012. Then we have J.G. Farrell, but posthumously. J.G. Farrell is known for his Empire trilogy. Of course, a trilogy, 3 novels. Empire refers to British Empire, the fall of the British Empire. So we have J.G. Farrell's Troubles. Troubles talks about the Irish War of Independence. So Ireland fighting against Britain. So he talks about the fall of the empire, British Empire. So that's novel. This novel was awarded Booker Prize posthumously because in 1970, Booker Prize was not awarded. There was this certain confusion. So they want to rectify that. So they announced a special prize called Lost Booker Prize because they lost it. No, that lost that year. So that prize was given to J.G. Farrell's Troubles. He won that posthumously, but he won Booker Prize for his novel The Siege of Krishnapur, set in India, 1857. 1857. Anyone? Year, of course. The revolt.
Indian War of Independence.
Yes,
first.
Indian War of
The First
Independence.
War of
or,
Independence or Shipai Mutiny.
we don't say Chipoy Mutiny. British call that Chipoy Mutiny, and we call it revolt. Okay. Anyway, we have Chipoy Mutiny or Indian Rebellion or revolt. This is from the British residents' point of view, how they look at this this revolt or mutiny. So the siege of Krishnapur. Okay, and he also wrote another novel called The Singapore Grip, which is part of the Empire trilogy. Okay, so with this we move on to the next one. One of my favorite authors. I took this work, The Blind Assassin, Margaret Atwood, Canadian writer, for my MA dissertation. 2000, it won the Booker Prize. And recently, Margaret Atwood's work, The Testaments. It's a joint winner because they shared the prize. Margaret Atwood shared the prize with another famous writer. Now you have Bernardine Evaristo for her book Girl, Woman and Other. So joint winners, the 2019. So you have Margaret Atwood's The Testaments, which is a sequel to The Testaments is a sequel to which novel? Margaret Atwood's novel.
Handmaiden.
Yes, The Handmaid's Tale. So Margaret Atwood, now we have this web series, The Handmaid's Tale. So The Testaments is a sequel to Handmaid's Tale. Okay. So I can talk a lot about The Blind Assassin, but not now. Anyway, I carry on. Yes, this is the question I asked you. Novel with a fictional novelist, Daniel Defoe. The answer is Foe. Why? Because Daniel Defoe's original name is actually Foe. He added that kind of a prefix de later words. No, later. So Daniel Defoe actually his original name was only Foe. So the title refers to Daniel Defoe because this is a retelling of which novel? You can guess. Daniel Defoe. Picaro's
Robinson
novel.
Crusoe.
Yes, Robinson Crusoe. So this novel is a retelling of Robinson Crusoe. So the title refers to Robinson Crusoe. I mean the author, Daniel Defoe, and Foe also means enemy. So that is a wordplay. So it refers to the author, also enemy. Who is enemy? I took up this novel for my MPhil as well as for my PhD. Who is the enemy? One who writes, in the sense, the writing, I would say kind of an Orientalist writing. The writing done on, the Orient, that is the enemy. Because through writing, they crystallize us. So that is the writing because it happens in this novel. So this novel is told from the point of view of a female survivor, Susan Barton. There is a shipwreck and she's cast away on an island where Robinson Crusoe and Friday, they have been living there. And now she is a witness to that event, and she notes everything, what Robinson Crusoe does and what Friday does. And there are also a lot of interesting things in the retelling. Friday here doesn't talk at all in the entire novel. We wonder whether he has a tongue, whether his tongue is cut off by Robinson Crusoe. So he wants to make him a slave. We don't know. It goes on and on. But the second part of the novel, Susan Barton, the female survivor, along with Friday, comes to London. Of course, Robinson Crusoe died on the island or during the journey. Yes, during the journey. And what happens when Susan Barton comes to London? She wants to tell her story to the world, but she doesn't have art. How to put it in words. She approaches a writer, and the name of the writer, Daniel Defoe. Now, Daniel Defoe manipulates Susan Barton, and he tells his version of the story. And Susan Barton's story is gone. Okay, so this is kind of counter narrative. That is my thesis. So this is an example for counter narrative. How a traditional tale, an established tale, is told from someone's point of view. Like here, a female survivor's point of view, they established a tale, a male tale, a male survivors. So when it comes to literature, every time there is a survival novel, fiction, or movie, we always have male survivors, hardly female, or male and female. So female's point of view is missing, a woman's point of view is missing. So this novel fulfills that vacuum. Okay. So with this, I move on to next one. section number 7. So a piece of information. 3 texts discussed in Gayatri Spivak's 3 women's texts and a critique of imperialism. So whenever you read post-colonialism, you will come across this work. 3 women's texts and a critique of imperialism. So you have Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre. Then you have Jean Rice, Dominican writer, White Sargasso's Sea, which is a kind of a retelling of Jane Eyre. Then you have Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. So this might be a question. 3 women's texts. What are the 3 texts? Simple. Jane Eyre, White Sargasso's Sea, Frankenstein. So this is a piece of information. Now I want you to look at the contents of this famous book, The Post-Colonial Studies Reader, edited by Bill Ashcraft, Gareth Griffiths, and Helen Tiffin. So you can get this book, you know where to get this book, or you can buy this book. Why am I asking to look at the contents? Because they have collected in such a way, there are a lot of famous essays, and definitely there will be a question in the sense, who wrote this essay? Unless you look at this contents, you may not know. So it's a beautiful collection. And you also have these 3 writers, Bill Ashcraft, Gareth Griffiths, and Helen Tiffin. They are known for this famous work, The Empire Writes Back. Okay. And who came up with this phrase, original phrase, The Empire Writes Back? Who said that?
Salman Rushdie.
Yes, Salman Rushdie said that, The Empire Writes Back. And Bill Ashcraft, Gareth Griffiths, and Helen Tiffin, they took the title for that famous one. And this is these are lines from this one. The Empire Writes Back. This is how they define post-colonial. To cover all the culture affected by the imperial process from the moment of colonization to the present time. So if you want to define post-colonialism, maybe you can use this definition from this book, The Empire Writes Back, by these 3 writers. And they also define post-colonial literatures, which includes African countries, Australia, Bangladesh, Canada, Caribbean countries, India, Malaysia, Malta, New Zealand, Pakistan, Singapore, South Pacific Island countries, Sri Lanka. So this is what they think about post-colonial literatures. Okay. So moving on, we come to section number 8, New Historicism. So latest, youngest school of criticism or theory. So new criticism, what is new criticism? It's a literary theory. Purpose, it politicizes and stresses the intimate relationship between literature, culture, and history, right? Or simply put, what it does, practice. Simply put, it does a parallel reading of literary and non-literary texts of the same period. So I will give an example, do not worry. So remember, when it comes to new historicism, how do you do research? So you have to choose a period in history. So you have to take a literary text as well as a non-literary text on particular topic in the same period. And if you read that, definitely you will come across something new. So literary text will help us interpret non-literary text, and non-literary text will help us interpret literary text. So they do not divide literature and non-literature. So there is a blend to it. And I also ask you to read Stephen Greenblatt, Michel Foucault, Clifford Geertz, Catherine Gallagher, and Louis Monstros. Rakesh, you have been raising your hand. You have something to say?
Sir, what is the difference between literary and non-literary texts, sir? Just in a word, in 2 words, how could you?
Okay, see, literature is fiction. Simple, right? Poem, short story, novel, anything. Non-literary, for instance, is history. Maybe any historical book on a particular topic. Maybe I will give an example immediately. Look at this example. We have Stephen Greenblatt, and this is his book. This is famous essay, Shakespeare and the Exorcist. And this is a history book. I mean, say he does a parallel reading of Samuel Hornsnest. This is a non-literary text. This book talks about a declaration of egregious popish impostures. It talks about the practice in the church and all the other things, something connected with black magic and theater. How sometimes, the church people, they sell their clothes to theater, the old clothes to theater. And Stephen Greenblatt wants to understand. He makes a connection between King Lear. So King Lear is a drama, a literary text. But Samuel Hosness, a declaration of egregious popish imposture, is a non-fiction. It's a non-literary text. But you can see a connection between King Lear and that text. So for that, you have to read this essay, Shakespeare and the Exorcist, where politically to show how Shakespeare converges exorcism and theater, because that non-literary text talks about how the connection between exorcism or the practice of exorcism within church. Sometimes they go for, they drive away the ghost. And you also see those elements in theater, especially by Shakespeare. Shakespeare uses exorcism in his theater. So we have this two connection. So now he draw parallels between that text and this text. So now there is no longer, the division of literary and non-literary text. Okay. So you can also come up with a text like that. Maybe is there anyone who talked about the sufferings of or the history of Dalits in literature? Maybe a non-literary text. Is there a writer who has written a novel on Dalits in a particular period? Can you do a parallel comparison? Or similar way, look at Black history written by white people and Toni Morrison's novel or the earlier novel. So what you can do a parallel reading, but the main thing about this criticism, new criticism, it should be written on the same period. So Samuel Hosnett, 1603 and 1600s King Lear. Fine. And famous book when it comes to new historicism, Renaissance Self-Fashioning from Thomas More to Shakespeare by Stephen Greenblatt. So whenever you think of new historicism, you have to think of Stephen Greenblatt, major critic. His another book, Shakespeare Negotiation, which includes another famous work, Invisible Bullets. Maybe you can go and check out Invisible Bullets and what it contains. Other famous critics, Catherine Gallagher, famous book, Practicing New Criticism. So if you want to do research using this theory, maybe you can read this book first. So how to practice new historicism in your research? And Catherine Gallagher wrote it with Stephen Greenblatt. And another famous writer, Clifford Geertz. So you have Deep Play, Notes on the Baroness Cockfight. So how do you capture culture? So a famous book, The Interpretation of Cultures. His famous work, concept, thick description. See, if you go for field work, so if you want to talk about or if you want to register certain event, that will become a cultural document. Literary writers, researchers, they are also become ethnographers. So what you have to do without prejudice, you have to go for thick description of that particular event. So maybe you go to an animal sacrifice in a temple or somewhere. So don't be prejudiced. So don't talk about, savage practice. No, don't talk about that. Your job is to go for thick description. What they do without, mixing, your feelings with that event, you just register that event through thick description. So this is one way of, capturing our own culture. So that is by Clifford Geertz. Then the most famous critic, he was brought into this criticism, Michel Foucault. What he says, create a rupture. Michel Foucault says there is always authority because of knowledge. The Archaeology of Knowledge, his famous book, where there is knowledge, there is power. I would say that's how you can understand Michel Foucault. Maybe how do you understand? Simple. If you go to a college or university, you can understand there is a kind of power relationship between, I would say kind of a power relationship between first year student and second year student. Why? Because they know more about the campus, more about the exam system, more about other things. But what happens to you? You also become a senior and you also do the same. The next year you put on an air. You know what? So you also, where there is knowledge, there is a kind of a power. I know that happens in the Archaeology of Knowledge. And in this work, there is an essay called The Unities of Discourse. So if you want to, rupture that feeling, when do you get power? because the notion of tradition. They say we are your seniors, super seniors, So we have to disturb that notion of tradition. Sometimes you have to disturb the notion of influence, because somebody say, you make a movie, you make a poem. They say, oh, I can trace the influence of that poet here, this poet here. Shut up. Or evolution. The moment you say evolution, so you are at the last phase. So how do you create power? Because you create power by creating a past, creating a knowledge, creating a history. So these are the words you have to destroy: tradition, influence, evolution, and spirit. You say the age, the spirit of this age. That age is known for certain things. Computer. So they brand an age. So this is how they exercise knowledge, and they term things, and they divide history, and they create hierarchy. When there is hierarchy, there is power. Okay. So when you think of Michel Foucault, you should think of his famous work Discipline and Punishment, where he talks about the birth of the prison. So when you think of prison, you also think of this concept, his famous concept. I won't say his concept. Panopticon, P-A-N, opticon, panopticon. Pan, as you know, pan means all. Opticon means vision. So in a prison, it's a circular prison where there is the tower in the center of the prison. From the center, they can see all the prisoners. It's a circular prison. And the prison was, the structure was outlined by which famous philosopher? From
Jeremy Bentham.
Yes, Jeremy Bentham. Jeremy Bentham, from whom Michel Foucault borrowed this concept. And he also traces the birth of the prison. So what now you can understand the methodology used by Michel Foucault. He traces, the history of the prison, the history of the clinic, the history of sexuality. Another of his famous book, The History of Sexuality, Volume 1, The Will to Knowledge. So that is his way of creating counter history, right? That's why I also refer to Michel Foucault in my thesis when I wrote on counter narrative, opposite storytelling, counter story. So episteme means knowledge. Discourse is the relationship between knowledge and power. I'm yet to discover the deeper understanding of these two terms, but anyway, get to know these two terms, biopower and biopolitics, associated with Michel Foucault. Then genealogy, that is his methodology, archaeology or genealogy. The moment you come across the word genealogy or archaeology, you have to associate with the Foucault and power, because he traces the power or the origin of the power by tracing the history. So tracing the genealogy or the archaeology. Okay. So with this, I move on to section 9. Again, I'm continuing with the new historicism, which is also called cultural poetics, because that's what we do. We read into the culture, we explore plot. And you have a question. Who said that new historicism reads the textuality of history and the historicity of text? That's what I told you. This is the essence of new historicism. A parallel reading of literary and non-literary text. Simply put, the textuality of history and historicity of text. So you can find traces of history in a literary text, and you can see literary construction in history, because you can't say because it is a history book everything written is truth. No, there are also fictional elements, fictional constructions there. Okay. So then next question, how does cultural materialism differ from new historicism? Then I also introduced some cultural materialists: Alan Sinfield, Jonathan Dollimore, Raymond Williams, and Stuart Hall. So now let's check out certain things. Of course, the answer, Louis Montrose. He said, new historicism studies the historicity of text and the textuality of histories. And we have to understand what is new historicism. Of course, we know something, but there is something called old historicism. So this is a difference I am quoting. So from Stephen Greenblatt. So the old historicism, what we do, we consider that as a raw material. So in generally, if you use an old historicist method, how do you analyze A Tale of Two Cities? We don't talk about, maybe you asked, Rakesh, you asked me the question. Now I got the perfect example for you. maybe you have a non-literary text called Thomas Carlyle's work, The French Revolution, a history. So that is a non-literary text where he talks about French Revolution, its history and everything. So that is a non-literary text. In the same period, the next you have Dickens. Dickens wrote, you have A Tale of Two Cities, which is based on, or its background is, the French Revolution. Now you can do a parallel reading of A Tale of Two Cities and Thomas Carlyle's French Revolution. If you do that, then that will be a new historicist reading. I hope you get the perfect example. Finally, we got the perfect example for that. So A Tale of Two Cities is a literary text, and Thomas Carlyle's work, The French Revolution, non-literary text. But old method, what is old method? How do you analyze A Tale of Two Cities? Simply where French Revolution is a historical backdrop or background, only a raw material. But when it comes to new historicist reading, we understand the institution of war, revolution, behind that revolution, French Revolution. Example, we have King Lear and A Hornist Declaration by Stephen Greenblatt. Okay. Then we have to compare and contrast cultural materialism and new historicism. Two different schools, but there are some similarities and differences. So cultural materialism is basically British school of criticism, simply the same, but there's some difference. They examine a literary work of the past, but in the present context. This is the main difference. Cultural materialism, British. New historicism, American. Fine. In new historicism, they give equal weightage to literary and non-literary texts of the same period. But in cultural materialism, the literary text is the past one. And you have to go for its present context, its relevance in the contemporary world. So that is a major difference in new historicism and between new historicism and cultural materialism. For instance, what is the relevance of Shakespeare today? So if you read that, maybe King Lear or Julius Caesar, or maybe I would say Julius Caesar, a tyrant. So at that time, now. So Stephen Greenblatt also wrote a work, I think, Tyrants, which talks about the present world. It also talks about Donald Trump. So, or other dictators now, contemporary world. So you are connecting Shakespeare with the contemporary period. So go and check out that work. I think it's by Stephen Greenblatt. Check out his famous latest book. Next, but of course, Stephen Greenblatt come in new historicism, but there is some connection between cultural materialism and new historicism. Okay, but sometimes both are same. Cultural materialism is seen as the British equivalent of new historicism. Okay, so this is a major difference, but let's say, what is cultural materialism? It studies literary text in its socio-historical context, focusing on the questions of class, ideology, and economy. So you can associate with Marxism. So immediately you can understand materialism, the word that is the key, because materialism is a basic concept in Marxism. They don't go for the spirit, ideal, that kind of thing. Material matters, human power, human labor matters, materialism. So cultural materialism, you can see the influence of Marxist ideology in cultural materialism. So famous critics, Raymond Williams, famous essay, culture is ordinary. So what is culture? So don't talk about high things. People talk about, oh my God, this is Tamil culture or this Indian culture. You talk about monuments, you talk about paintings, a lot of other things. That's okay. But Raymond Williams says, that's okay, gentlemen, women. The thing is, two aspects. One traditional, another creative. In the sense, to mean a whole way of life. So how do we understand the present with our past? So that is also culture. But we also create our own culture in the present now. So for instance, what we eat now, what we wear now, what we speak now, everything is culture. So that's why he calls culture is ordinary. What we do every day is culture. So when we think of culture, we only think of tradition. No, that is only one part of or one definition of culture. It's incomplete. Another thing is ordinary, everyday. And his another famous book, Keywords, a vocabulary of culture and society. Next, you have this two authors, Jonathan Dollymore and Alan Sinfield, political Shakespeare. I told you, right? They politicize Shakespeare, a commitment to politicize literature. That is the purpose of cultural materialism. You can't say, I will study only literary elements, figures of speech and literary devices. I will not talk about social problems. So that you can't do in cultural materialism. So you have to politicize literature. So the title itself is evident, political Shakespeare. So then you have Stuart Hall, another famous critic, cultural studies. Now you have something called cultural studies. So it's an extension of cultural materialism and new historicism. So that is the latest development in literary theory and criticism, cultural studies. And Stuart Hall, famous book, Culture, Media and Language. It was edited by him and other people. And one of his famous essays, Encoding and Decoding, where he talks about communication model. Traditional communication model, he says, is a closed system. Sender, message, receiver. After that, that system is closed. And Stuart Hall came up with an open system. It's a kind of, so think of today's media based on our feedback, viewership. They change the content. So if you release a video on the YouTube, depends on the likes, depends on the content, depends on the feedback. Next time you can see a change in the video. So it's a kind of an open model. In the sense, this model he calls encoding, decoding model. So that involves 4 sections. You have production, then it gets circulated, then it is distributed or consumed by the audience, then reproduction, it comes back. So this is a model put forward by Stuart Hall in this essay, Encoding and Decoding. Then we come to the last section today, section 10. One of my favorite lines in literature. I saw the best minds of generation destroyed by madness, is the opening line of Allen Ginsberg's poem Howl. And they all come under Beat Generation, which includes William S. Burroughs and Jack Kerouac. So I'm introducing a movement, Beat Generation, to my students if they are new to it. Then I also ask them to read about Imagist movement, Lost Generation, the movement that itself a literary movement, then the group, then Bloomsbury group and the Angry Young Men. I have also written some notes about these groups. They can find it in my notes on poetry, or they have to rely on the internet or other sources to find about them. But the interesting thing is students should work. There is no shortcut. So sometimes certain people, they ask me, so why don't you give us 10,000 points like other coaches, other instructors? I don't do that. I can give you more than that, but you won't remember all the things. Okay. So we are on the verge of finishing today's class. Beat Generation, it's a kind of an iconoclastic American writers in the 1950s. They lived in their life in their own way. They took drugs. They had no morality, I won't say. They didn't bother about sexual relationships. They experiment with the writing, something called automatic writing. They took opium, they took wine, drugs. They started writing whatever came to their mind. They called it automatic writing, like our Coleridge. After taking opium, he wrote the Kubla Khan. And they rebelled against the traditional values and materialism and intellectualism. This is the generation that came after after World War II. Major figure Allen Ginsberg, Jack Kerouac, and William S. Burroughs. And the word beat refers to, it was first used by Jack Kerouac. It means beaten down. They were dropouts, college dropouts. They were tired of the social activities, political activities, World War I, World War II. And it also has some spiritual connection, the beatitudes of Jesus, the blessings uttered during the Sermon on the Mountain. Then beatific also means bliss, happiness. And it also refers to the music, rhythm, beat of jazz. So you have all this meaning associated with the beat. Then you have Allen Ginsberg, Howl, and the famous line. It was, they were influenced by Zen Buddhism, jazz music, and bohemianism. Non-conformism, drugs, free sex, and all the other things. So this is beat writing. Famous writers, Jack Kerouac's novel, On the Road, The Buddha Bumps, then William S. Burroughs' Junkie, The Naked Lunch, then Gregory Carsow's famous poem Bomb. So you have the poem, it's in the kind of a shape poetry. It resembles the shape of an atomic bomb, the cloud, that is called a mushroom cloud. So that is there. Gasoline, another poem. Then you have Lawrence Ferlinghetti's collection, A Coney Island of the Mind. Okay, these are some of the famous works under Beat. Now let's check out the movement. It's a literary group of the 1950s. In the 1950s, they are called 1950s poet. You have and also contemporary. No, it's like a postmodern. After 1950s, we call the contemporary British literature. So if you want to introduce yourself to contemporary British literature and post-modern writing, you have Kingsley Amis, Philip Larkin, Donald Dye, DJ Enright, John Wayne, Elizabeth Jennings, Tom Gunn, Robert Conquest. And they're also called, the movement poets, they're also called new university wits. Why? Most of them were university lectures, and we have Philip Larkin, university librarian, and this is one of his famous poems, Toads. He gives a new meaning, I would say trope, right? That's how we begin this lecture. Trope, a turn in meaning. Toad, as you know, it's a type of frog, but he gives a new twist to this image or animal. Toad becomes a mechanical life. Why should I let the toad work spat on my life? Can't I use my wit as a pitchfork and drive the brute off? So how in this modern life we live like a toad? So toad here becomes a monotonous life. So he asks us to remove the toad off our life. So this is one of his famous poems. Another famous poem by Tom Gunn, On the Move. Man, you gotta go. So it talks about bikers, a group of bikers, they just go on and on. They don't bother about anything. So it also talks about hippie culture and this beat generation, but it's a kind of a defense. These motorists on motorcycles up the road, they come. Small black as flies hang in the heat, kind of a simile. So it's a kind of a perspective. Someone is looking at the arrival of these bikers. In the distance, they look like flies hanging in heat. And they come and they go through this street, the market, and they go away. But the speaker says, I'm stuck in life. At least they are on the move. One is always nearer by not keeping still. So we have to move on. So we have to live this life. We can't be stuck in time. Okay. So what is group? That is a minor literary group, a kind of an informal group. They discussed literature from mid-1950s and 1960s, and they are considered the successors to the movement poets. Poets include Edward Lucius Smith, Philip Hobsbawm, Peter Redgrove, Peter Potter, famous writer, George Macbeth, Alan Brownshaw, then Martin Bell. Ted Hughes sometimes attended the group occasionally, the animal poet. So let's look at some of the works. A famous work, one of my favorite poems, Your Attention Please, by Peter Potter. You should read this poem because he read this poem on a show, in a radio show. So people listen to his reading, through the radio. People thought actually what he's saying is true, because Your Attention Please talks about, someone has sent a nuclear missile and it is coming to our city. What you have to do? So you have to follow the codes given by our government. You have to take certain precautions. And people listening to this poem thought, oh my God. So this is an announcement from the government. They thought this is for real. And they thought they have to take the precautions, suggested by the government, they thought. But it's actually a reading of a poem. Because why this misunderstanding happens? Because some people switched on the poem or turned on the radio in the halfway. According to the instruction in the defense code, do not take well-loved pets because they will consume oxygen in your shelter, underground shelter. They will consume fresh air. So leave your pets out. And also don't bother about the old and bedridden, right? You can do nothing for them. So if there is an emergency, don't bother about this old and the bedridden and your pets. Immediately go to the shelter, okay, so that you can escape from nuclear, the missile and the attack. But anyway, the next day, Peter Porter apologized to the entire nation. And this is Ted Hughes' Thought Fox. It's a kind of a meta poem. So he looks at a thought coming in, Fox, and the thought coming in. At the end of the poem, you have a poem written, a kind of a meta poem, like meta fiction. It calls attention to its fictionality. Till with a sudden sharp, hot sting of Fox, it enters the dark hole of the head. The window is starless still, the clock ticks, the page is printed. That means he has finished writing this poem called Thought Fox. It's a metafictional poem. It draws attention to its own fictionality, how it is written by an author. Next, we have Imagist poem. We already discussed this image. They focus on images, how to represent reality through images. And we started off with Ezra Pound's poem, In a Station of a Metro. And this is Ezra Pound's definition of an image, that which presents an intellectual and emotional complex in an instant of time. Just like that, snap of a finger, everything comes to your mind when you read that poem, In a Station of a Metro. He calls his method ideogrammatic method. How to convey abstract ideas through concrete images, graphic. So that is ideo, that means idea. Grammic means writing. So abstract ideas through concrete images. How can you represent love? Some certain feelings only through concrete images, through imagist. So imagist poems. Okay. So one of the examples, William Carlos Williams, The Red Wheel Barrow. Simple. You have so much depends upon a red wheel barrow glazed with rain water beside the white chickens. We are just given an image. We don't know whose wheelbarrow is this, why it is red, and it is contrasted with the white chickens, and there is rain. Maybe it talks about unemployment, where maybe for farmers they are struggling. Maybe poultry, they rear poultry again, which is also useless. We don't know. Maybe the struggle of farmers. There are a lot of interpretation. Interpretation is open to anyone. So next, the famous anthology, Ezra Pound. We have images. So these are the famous poets: Richard Aldington, Hilda Doolittle, Amy Lowell, William Carlos Williams, sometimes James Joyce, because in this collection we have poems from all these writers: Ford, Maddox Ford, Alan Upward, John Cornus, F.S. Flint, Skipwith Cannell, then also D.H. Lawrence. And the year is important, 1914. And let's wind up today's class with this poem. He doesn't come under imagist movement, but I find this poem interesting. And this I would consider best example for imagist poetry. Billy Collins' Divorce. See, before divorce, what happened? See, look at this poem. One simple word, so kind of a flashback. 2 spoons in bed, so kind of sensual imagery. 2 spoons in bed, the intimacy of the lovers or husband and wife. But now, tined forks. Forks, it has sharp edges, tined, sharp edges. So that's there. Then where are those forks? Across a granite table. So granite is hard, which is cold. The relationship is cold now. So it's no longer enjoyment. And they are at war. The knives they have hired, means lawyers. So the process is going on. The knives refers to kind of a war, and they are waging a war between them through lawyers. So divorce. Okay. So with this, I finish today's lecture and the 3-day free webinar offered by Professor Academy.